o'clock, time to start the city council meeting. I would like to call the March 10th, 2021 city council meeting to order. Would everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Carey.
Present.
Chilson.
Present.
Lisa Parker.
She has an excused absence for this meeting.
Hutchings.
Oh, here.
Ruffridge.
Here.
Pamela Parker.
Here.
Student Representative Cox.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda and consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda?
I'll make
Ms.
a motion
Hutchins?
to approve the agenda and consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Mr. Chilson, thank you.
I think Councilman Rufford beat me to that.
Are there any changes to the agenda or consent agenda? Would the clerk please read the consent agenda?
Approval of the February 24th, 2021 special council meeting minutes and approval of the February 24th, 2021 regular council meeting minutes. New business ordinances, Ordinance 2021-5, adopting the all-hazard mitigation plan update, introduced by the city manager with a public hearing on March 24th, 2021. Ordinance 2021-6, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $13,000 in the airport fund for a grant provided by the Federal Aviation Administration under the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act for the Soldotna Municipal Airport, introduced by the city manager with a public hearing on March 24th. Resolutions. Resolution 2021-10, commending the City of Soldotna Police Department in recognition of the officers and administrative staff for their service to the City of Soldotna, introduced by Councilmember Carey. Resolution 2021-11, amending the City of Soldotna mini grant program policy, introduced by Council Members Chilson and Ruffridge. Resolution 2021-12, authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with B&B Landscaping in the amount of $22,625 for the downtown tree purchase, introduced by the city manager. And other items, Action Memorandum 2021-3, extension of the city manager employment agreement, and that is your consent agenda.
Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Are there anyone with raised hands?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. There are no hands raised.
Thank you. Having no one wishing to speak, the approval of the agenda and consent agenda is back before the council. Are there any council objections to approving the agenda and consent agenda? Hearing none, the agenda and consent agenda are approved. Mr. Carey, I do have a request. Would you like to read that Resolution 2021-10 into the record?
Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for that request. I want to mention the work with the clerk's office and the clerk herself to get it put together, and also the chief of police input into this a couple times through the clerk. But Mr. Mayor, you're the mayor of our whole town, and you're the presiding officer of our whole council. To me, it adds prestige whenever we can get you, the mayor, to read something like this. It is still my intent, and the clerk is working toward that we'll get this in a form and, again, get everyone's signature as well as yours, and I'm hoping everyone's willing to do that and take it to the police in some form. But respectfully, Mr. Mayor, I'd ask that you read it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Carey. I will go ahead and read this. Resolution 2021-10, resolution commending the City of Soldotna Police Department in recognition of the officers and administrative staff for their service to the City of Soldotna. Whereas the Soldotna Police Department was established on July 1st, 1969 with one employee, the Director of Public Safety, and whereas Soldotna PD was the first police department in Alaska to be accredited through the Oregon Accreditation Alliance, meaning that their operations, management, policies, and procedures meet the best practices of the industry has to offer. And whereas officers from the SPD work to support students and young people with programs like DARE and Explorers, along with an officer in school presence And whereas the community relations of SPD officers and staff include serving hot dogs at Progress Days, participating in community forums and events, Coffee with the Cop and Shop with the Cop, and whereas several SPD officers have significant tenure of 15 through 25 plus years, and whereas a basic tenet of America's society is built upon the partnership between law enforcement and the constituent parts of local society. In Soldotna, youth and elder residents and tourists, businesses, large and small, are all served by SPD. And whereas SPD is a key component ensuring the safety of our community in the following: roadway safety, medical care facilities, and tourism, providing examples of safety in our local schools and educational activities, sheltering and protecting all levels of commerce and the many and varied individuals that depend upon the service and opportunities offered within our community, supporting residents and their families during life-threatening situations and events, working within the local, state, and national network of agreements to assist residents and visitors throughout our area, providing assistance to senior citizens and the many nonprofit organizations that greatly enhance our quality of life for all. And whereas all employees of SPD deserve the appreciation and respect of the residents of Soldotna, Alaska for the merit, dignity, bravery, and reliability they exhibit each and every day. Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Soldotna, Alaska, that the Soldotna City Council commends the officers of the Soldotna Police Department, publicly saluting their service as law enforcement officers of our city and for placing their lives on the line to ensure the safety and security of Soldotna residents. Section 2, that the Soldotna City Council commends the SPD administrative staff for supporting Soldotna police officers and serving as the direct line between the general public and the officers. Section 3, this resolution shall become effective immediately upon its adoption. And thank you, Soldotna Police Department, for all your hard work, year-round, every day. Thank you again. Okay, we'll move on to item 4 on the agenda, public comments and presentations. Items other than those appearing on the agenda, 3 minutes per speaker, 20 minutes aggregate. Are there any members from the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hands if you would like to comment, app users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Madam Clerk, is there any hands raised?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I see no hands raised.
Thank you. Well, moving on to item 5 on the agenda, Assembly and Legislative Report. Are there any representatives from the borough or the state in attendance who would like to speak? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand. If you would like to comment, app users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Do we have any raised hands?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. There are no raised hands.
Thank you. Moving on to administrative reports, item 6, the Aspen Dog Park Tree Assessment and Spruce Bark Beetle Removal Grant Update. Report from the administration, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Ms. Sainer, I don't know if Andrew Carmichael is with us online. If not, I'm happy to kind of give this report. It was really for twofold reasons. One was to give you an update on the federal FEMA grant funding, which we were notified last year that our project had the potential to be funded approximately $300,000. And Mr. Zarneski worked closely with Mr. Carmichael and a local forester, Mitch Mashad, in putting together that packet of application for federal funding, predominantly to reduce the fire hazard of the spruce bark beetle on city properties. And it included really all large city properties, including our big parks like Centennial and Swiftwater, as well as our smaller pocket parks like Farnsworth and the dog park. That funding, we now know, is potentially 12 to 18 months out from right now. So we were able to get with our contacts at the state, and they reached out to FEMA. FEMA's going to be doing an environmental assessment. They needed some additional information from us, which we are providing. This will be at their own cost, but it's an additional step. And at this point, that's our expectation as far as when those spruce bark beetle removal funds will be available, 12 to 18 months from right now. Andrew approached me because he was fairly concerned with the trees at one park in particular, and that's the dog park. It's kind of a unique property in that it's got large private structures, multifamily buildings on two sides. We've got some city infrastructure there with our utility well house, and the park itself is well-loved and heavily used. So when he came forward with concerns about the trees, we wanted to reach out. I thought it was important to get an assessment from a professional to help us gauge what's the urgency with which we need to act. Is it true that we can feel fairly comfortable waiting for these grant funds before we clear the property, or do we need to clear the whole property now, or is there some in between? The cost to clear the property by hiring a contractor, I think Andrew's assessment came back at approximately $30,000. But we went ahead and engaged again with Mitch Mashad, who's a forester who prepared this report. I included it in the packet in part because it's highly informative to me, the level of analysis and expertise that exists around issues like this. As you can see, he provided a very detailed analysis of the trees at that park. Ultimately, his assessment led us to a recommendation that there are some trees that we do want to deal with right now. They've got some rot. They're more susceptible to wind, and or they're closer to adjacent structures. And so what we're proposing to do would be to use some funds, potentially from our contingency funds, to go in and remove those higher risk trees right now. The bulk of the trees, however, I'm suggesting can remain, at least for now, potentially to reassess next year. Maybe by then we will either have the grant funds or we can appropriate some additional funds. But the bottom line is that all of those trees are dead, and essentially it will be a clear cut of the entire property. So I'd like to have the ability to engage the public, let them know what's potentially coming, but also, if we can, utilize those grant funds, which this was the purpose of those funds. So if we started to take out more of the trees from the main stand, it actually increases the risk to the other trees around it, because they will be newly susceptible to wind. We're now moving heavy equipment and potentially damaging their root systems. So our recommendation at this point is to leave that main stand of trees, knowing that they will have to come down at some point, deal with the higher hazard trees that are kind of closer to the road and closer to the apartment buildings. But really, we haven't had a detailed conversation about spruce bark trees in any of our parks. I wanted to bring this issue forward knowing that it's the property that we think needs some attention and a plan to be implemented first. So that would be the recommendation at this point. The other thing we might do operationally is if there's a really high wind event, that's when the trees actually are most susceptible to failure. We could also close the park. Those high wind events happen typically, I think, later in the fall. But if that was the case, we were concerned about safety, we could also just post the park as closed for those trees that remain in the main stand of trees. With that, I'd be happy to kind of entertain questions or any discussion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions from the council? Mr. Carey?
Madam Manager, are you looking for a motion from us to move forward on this, or are you looking just to get our input? How can I facilitate what I heard you say I think we need to do?
Thank you, Mr. Carey. I mostly wanted to present the issue and then be available to hear if there were any strong objections. As I mentioned, the trees will all need to come down. It's not a matter of if, but when. I think that it's probably safe they can stay for another year. But I wanted to propose this plan, have an opportunity to have it on the agenda, to have it in front of the council. We wouldn't need any action from you at this point. After tonight, if there's no serious concerns or objections, we'll move forward in this way where we hire someone to come in and take care of a smaller number of the trees. But really, it was meant to just make you aware that we're aware of this issue, give you an update on the grant funding, and really start the dialogue that I think we're going to be talking about for the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Mr. Ruffridge?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no objections to removing dead trees. I have an objection to a park not looking like a park. It would be my preference, and certainly what I would promote a discussion regarding. I think Mr. Chilson mentioned it last time we had this discussion. A plan for what this park looks like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. There's a lot of trees in there. There's a lot of trees where the dogs and everyone gather. We utilize this park on a fairly regular basis, and the trees are a major component of what's in there. And I think the removal in and of itself obviously needs to happen, but it would go a long way, I think, to users of the park to know what the plan is before it begins. That the removal of the trees is just step one in a three-phase approach to ensuring that the park is beautiful and engaging for humans and pets alike.
Ms. Hutchings?
My question is, what's going to be done with the trees when they come down? Because spruce bark beetles hatch at like 70 degrees. So I don't know that you want to give them to people to use for firewood or anything else, because you're going to promote the increase of spruce beetles.
Ms. Hutchings, I don't have the answer to that. I think that we would consult with Mr. Mashad and also the contractor to make sure we were dealing with them appropriately and not causing unintended further consequences.
Are there any further questions or comments from the council? Ms. Parker?
I do agree with the need to remove those trees if they're dead and could potentially be a hazard, but I would like to see a plan for revegetating the area and then maybe input from folks that use the park and then also the ones that live around it, because right now those trees probably provide a pretty nice, obviously not a sound barrier, but a visual barrier from what's happening in the dog park. So I'm sure they would like to know that there's at least a plan to rebuild that natural barrier.
Thank you for those suggestions. So we will certainly work through our normal planning processes, engaging the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, bringing in some professional consultants so that the residents can have an input, and our advisory boards and committees can as well, into what the future of that park looks like, knowing it'll be different than how it was, but recognizing the importance particularly of shade and kind of the forest feeling of that particular park. We will be happy to engage in that process. And I think it makes sense, certainly, to have that plan in place and worked through the process prior to cutting the main stand of trees. I think that would certainly be important.
Ms. Parker?
And just to be clear, I would definitely support getting rid of the ones that need to come down as soon as possible.
Any other comments? I have kind of a follow-up to what everyone said. I agree with everything that's been said, that definitely needs a plan on how to replant that park and make it more of a park setting than a piece of bare land. But I also feel that if we're going to cut trees down, we start cutting them all at one time, not go in there, take a few now, and then come back later and do some more. Just bite the bullet and get them all done at one time, but with a plan of what to do after that. I'd hate to see that we take out a half a dozen or so of the worst ones, and then come 2 months later, somebody gets hurt because a tree limb falls or something like that. So that's the only comments I have. Thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is number 7, public hearings, and we have no public hearings this evening. Moving on to item 8, which is new business, and almost all of the new business was taken care of other than Resolution 2021-013, updating the Soldotna Care spending plan for COVID-19 relief funds and approving new grant programs, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to adopt? Ms. Hutchings.
I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-013,
Thank you.
updating the Soldotna Care spending plan.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Chilson.
And Mayor Whitney, I'd like to declare a potential conflict just with some of the funds potentially being allocated towards restaurants in the area, and then also towards the Soldotna Chamber, potentially for a shop local program. So I do own a restaurant in the city, and I serve on the board for the Soldotna Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. I think to be on the safe side, we'll excuse you from this motion, or from this resolution.
And Mr. Mayor, I
Go
also
ahead,
have a
Mr.
potential
Wilson.
conflict. This resolution would authorize a bucket of money for mental health support, and although it's not explicitly stated in this, last time we had money available for mental health, there was a large grant that was awarded to PCHS. I was serving on their board of directors, and I do continue to serve on their board of directors, and they could potentially be eligible for additional funding through this again this next year.
But that is not in the resolution at this time. It's a
It is
possibility,
not.
but
It's a possibility, but I just wanted, just out of an abundance of caution, put that out there.
I'm not going to see that as
Okay.
put a conflict at this time. So, okay, let's see where are we at here. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Had we not already had a work session scheduled tonight, I may have called a work session on this topic because I know there's a lot of interest, a lot of good ideas. And what we're presenting here is essentially a new strategy for the remaining CARES Act funds that the city has. We last came to you with a plan in the beginning of December, and that's when we thought we had to use all the money by the end of December. When Congress extended the deadline 7 days before the deadline, I believe, we put a pause on that previous plan so that we'd have an opportunity to come back with the council, engage some stakeholders on revisiting the future of the funding strategy for the CARES Act money. We've got approximately $2 million left, and the updating spending plan that's included in the packet is on page 83 of the packet. It's a similar format to what you've seen before many times. As you'll know, this is an iterative process. I included all of the funding that has been spent to date in that top portion of the table, so that you can see we're at $7,952,000 approximately of expenditures to date, and you can see the different categories that those broke down into. What we're recommending moving forward are the three categories shown on the bottom of the page, and they roughly are essentially business support and economic development programs. The second would be nonprofit grants for critical social service providers. And then the third would be a miscellaneous category that includes city's payroll, city expenditures on materials, supplies, et cetera, to respond to COVID. We had a meeting with some folks from the community, leaders from different industries and nonprofit and public entities to advise on some potential programs. And what we heard were continued need for supporting economic development programs. There was a lot of recognition of the success of the Shop Local program. There was a lot of recognition of how important our early grants to business owners were, how necessary those were. Moving forward, we're proposing to do something that feels more targeted. Early on, we did a phase 1 and a phase 2 round of grants for businesses that were open to all businesses in Soldotna. Knowing that the money we have moving forward is much smaller than what we had last year, we're recommending something more targeted that really aims at attracting in-state visitors to Soldotna this summer, making sure that we can kind of support our tourism businesses with getting in-state Alaskans to come visit if they were not already thinking of doing that. We're proposing to continue the virtual storefront improvement program. Approximately 20 businesses have taken advantage of that to improve their websites, add point of sale components to their websites, and reach new customers that way. We are proposing to do another Shop Local program, but not until the same time as we did it last year. I think the timing was part of the magic, and that's a time of year when locals are buying gifts for friends and loved ones, and we want them to consider doing that locally as opposed to online. Keep it local. And then one new program that we're excited about is a grant that would be for restaurants specifically to set up outdoor dining. That's a program we'd like to get started soon, and it, I think, aligns very well with our other economic development strategies of getting people outdoors in the summer in downtown Soldotna. The idea is to have a grant targeted towards restaurants where they can buy tables, umbrellas, lighting, heaters, windbreaks, and really set up pop-up outdoor dining. The goal is to assist the restaurants in expanding their kind of customer base, but also support residents who maybe have not eaten out in Soldotna in quite a long time, feeling comfortable to come back and do that in a safe way. So we've researched some similar programs. That would be one specifically that's referenced in the resolution that if it's approved tonight, we would get started working on right away. That one we could administer in-house, but we would partner with the chamber on the branding and the marketing, as well as potentially even doing things like a map of outdoor dining options in Soldotna, really trying to get everybody back outdoors and downtown this summer. When it comes to the nonprofit and critical social service needs category, unfortunately, when we had that meeting, we heard a lot of very familiar needs in the community, including transportation, housing, food security, support for our children, homelessness, mental health. These are the big challenges of our community that existed pre-COVID and then maybe are made more challenging during COVID. Rather than try to address individual issues, what we're recommending is instead a grant program that would be administered in partnership with the Alaska Community Foundation, and I'll speak a little bit more to that. But we really think that's going to be the best use of our staff resources to just open up a round of grant funding, maybe that's more targeted in terms of these issues that are of important concern to us, but allow individual nonprofits within the community to tell us what they can do, what are their needs, how are they able to continue addressing these critical challenges in the community. The Alaska Community Foundation, we reached out to really just to ask their advice on setting up a new grant program that maybe had criteria that were more specific than the ones we used last year. And in that conversation, we understood that they would potentially be willing to agree to a partnership where they could handle the application process, they could handle the marketing. We also would assist with communication, and we could control kind of the criteria as well as the final decision-making. But I think in terms of resources, that would be a really good partnership for us to consider. Our staff, I am so proud of the work they did last year. It would be challenging for us to replicate that again in terms of the amount of time that we spent internally administering these grant programs. So I was actually really thrilled that they were open to this partnership, knowing that we're much smaller than some of the other partnerships that they have, but it aligns with their mission, and they're willing to work with us if that's the direction we want to go. So that takes care of the business support, the nonprofit support. The last one, city payroll and miscellaneous. We still are buying supplies at the library, supplies at the parks and the sports center. And in terms of staff time, we're really, it's much less, but we're supporting some of the vaccination clinics. That's kind of, like I said, a miscellaneous category. And these numbers that are included in the budget really are an initial estimate. If there's anything we learned last year, it's that sometimes we were pretty dialed in terms of our estimate and the demand on a certain program. Other times we were less so. So really, this is something that I would anticipate gets revisited by the council many times as we open up some of the programs, learn more about what the need and demand is, and then come back throughout the year. As I mentioned, we've got through this whole calendar year to use this remaining $2 million. And I'll just say as an aside, the city will be getting, we anticipate some additional funding. There's about $2 million that's available. We can apply for funding for vaccination and testing efforts specifically. So that's an additional resource up and above and beyond this funding. The new federal stimulus relief bill passed today, and we'll be learning more about that funding. But really, we're ready to keep going. I think we've got some ideas. I'm really interested to hear the council's ideas and any feedback on things you want us to be focusing on. Knowing that it'll be a smaller bite than last year, but still a continued need, we're happy to keep going. And with that, I'll conclude my report.
Thank you for your report. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hands if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. There's no one in the chambers. Do we have anyone raising their hands?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. There are no hands raised.
None? No. Thank you. Hearing no one who wishes to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Ms. Hutchings.
I was just going to say that I'm working on a similar project, not with as much money, with the Kenai Peninsula Foundation, and we work with the Alaska Community Foundation. And what we have found is Alaska Community, through Rasmussen, has been matching some of those funds. So I didn't know if there is an opportunity for some matches for that money to be provided if the Alaska Community Foundation is going to be taking care of it.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchings. That's an excellent question that we will follow up on. And if there is an opportunity for foundation funding to be matched to even stretch our dollars further, we would happily explore that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to our manager. one of many nice things about the whole program that the city's done and the staff has done an excellent job was that in the second round, if you had already applied for and received some, that if you then had things, again, from months that came afterwards, they did not have to do another full application. They basically, I guess I'd say, they did an addendum. Would you anticipate, ma'am, that that would be the case again for these nonprofits?
Thank you through the mayor, Mr. Carey. I would anticipate that they would have to apply again because this, at least the way we're envisioning this round of funding, it would be project specific. So our first round of nonprofit funding, it could be for any expenses they have, including lost revenue. And really that award amount was based on a percentage of their annual revenue. Moving forward, at least in the way we originally conceived it, they would be pitching a project. So it would feel more like the way we interacted with Love Inc. at the end of the year, the food bank at the end of the year, PCHS was mentioned. Those were project-specific agreements that we entered into with those agencies. What would be different is that in each one of those, we were reaching out to people in the community trying to put these projects together and get them funded. It was very labor-intensive, and the approach this time that we're suggesting might be more efficient is to, again, allow them to pitch specific needs and specific projects, but have them funnel through this foundation in terms of making a pitch for their project. Here's how much they think they need for it, and going through that application process with the Alaska Community Foundation. So it would be a significant increase in terms of, I think, paperwork, but for the purpose of them being able to outline a specific project that meets one of these needs.
Again, I just want to say I appreciate so much the work you and your staff have done. And in this, moving forward, if there is any way that we can specifically help senior citizens, I'd sure like to see that. Thank you.
Mr. Buffridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I was excited to see some of these things on the list. I think it's a great effort here to keep going forward. A couple of questions that I had specifically related to in-state tourists and the outdoor dining. Is there an estimate of how many, I guess, have we reached out to restaurants at all to determine how many entities would be interested in this? I'm just trying to think of just places within the city limits of Soldotna. And it seems like maybe space might be limited in a number of these places, or they have an outdoor eating option already. So maybe they would just need to be enhanced or something along those lines. Will there be guidelines about places that already have an outdoor space not being eligible for the fund? It just seems like there's a lot of questions that come up with who would be eligible for these. In addition to that, sort of generic question, are there specific rules about, I guess, mostly alcohol consumption outdoors in certain areas that we would need to worry about with certain regulatory processes? No, that's obviously a concern for a lot of restaurants, particularly in that alcohol sales drive a lot of their revenues. So a couple of questions just there about whether how many people we think would uptake this, and would there be regulatory concerns?
Thank you, Mr. Ruffridge. So we've got about approximately 30 restaurants in Soldotna when we were kind of going through our list and trying to build out that list. Many of them, more so than I had remembered, actually have kind of quasi-outdoor spaces already. Our thought was that all restaurants would be eligible for the grant funding, including ones that already have outdoor dining, if they can either increase capacity or enhance that outdoor dining. So we were envisioning making it available to everyone. In terms of the space limitations, one of the things we saw that wouldn't work for our town, but is done many places, is these things are actually set up on like a main street. You take back a portion of the street by blocking it off and creating seating. We're not really set up that way. We're kind of a highway town, but kind of a parallel would be the opportunity, if a business owner was willing, they could take up a portion of their parking lot. So again, I use the term pop-up dining, meaning try it for a year. it doesn't have to be permanently constructed. We will work with them on safety and laying out the site, making sure that it's safe for both the vehicle movement. But that's kind of the atmosphere. And we've got lots of examples of really creative things that business owners have done really from across the country, because in many places, outdoor dining was the only way they could have any seating, right? They were either closed or they had to be outdoors. So we've seen a lot of interesting ideas. Our thought was to put together a package of specific guidelines, the things that are eligible, maybe working very closely with our planning staff on their site plan. Is there an area of lawn that they have? Is there a portion of sidewalk or maybe even a portion of parking lot that they want to designate this summer to try this, to set up tables and chairs? We would work with them on the planning aspect of it. And it would be relaxing some of our kind of permanent standards when it comes to building, parking, et cetera. Kind of a one-year try. The third question I wrote down was about alcohol licensing. So you're correct to point out that the licensing agency, which is through the state of Alaska, AMCO, has designated premises for liquor license establishments. And they do have their own rules about how to either amend that premises or what has to happen if a portion of it's going to be outdoors. We would refer to that in our I think programs, but we're not in a position to influence those rules and how they apply. So other than trying to understand whether, I know AMCO relaxed some regulations last year, for example, allowing people to sell things to go if they were a business that didn't otherwise have that capability. I'd want to understand what the regulatory environment was going to be this year so that we could communicate that to folks, but really it's not the kind of thing we would be able to influence locally. So we would just want to help folks understand if they had questions about that, where to get those answers. And I think those were the questions that I jotted down just now.
Yeah, follow up if I may.
Yeah, I just might want to add
Sure.
something to that, though. Having dealt with the ABC board on some things, outdoor service is very strict. Fencing required, access limited to who can get into that particular area and so forth. They may have relaxed some of those rules and regulations during this pandemic, but with the emergency declaration going away, some of those rule changes may not be in effect anymore. So they would have to do some real heavy work with the ABC board and seeing how we could make it alcohol service. So go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, that was certainly, as long as we're being, communicative about that process. I know that's a huge component to restauranting. Although I did hear you say in your plan that there was maybe a potential to block off the streets for my party scenario in there somewhere. So, no. My follow-up is just on the marketing of in-state tourism. It's not super spelled out in the memorandum, but I know at our work group sessions there was a number of sort of dialogue points regarding the potential to really try to activate not only in-state tourists but sort of trying to access individuals who are choosing to not come to Alaska either via cruise ship and then on the railroad or buses, and might be utilizing the airport. So I didn't see out-of-state tourists referenced on here, and I know we obviously have people that come from out of state, but is there a plan potentially to say, hey, you might not be on the train and the train doesn't stop here, maybe this is your chance to see the Kenai, and that was not initially on your list of places to go type of thing?
Thank you, through the mayor, to Mr. Ruffridge. So you're exactly right. It's not spelled out in the memo, and it's not one of the sections of the resolution because we don't have a plan yet, a specific plan or a targeted budget for that program. The sections of the resolution would adopt the spending plan in general, and then they would get us started on the three programs that we think we have enough detail now to get started with right away. Those are the virtual storefront improvement program, the outdoor dining grants for restaurants, and then this partnership with the Alaska Community Foundation. I have had follow-up conversations with Shannon Davis at the Soldotna Chamber, we would lean heavily on the destination marketing organizations with their expertise about how to utilize those marketing funds. And it wouldn't have to be limited to only in-state, but just I included that language based on an initial conversation I had with Ms. Davis, which seemed to suggest that that would be the most effective use of our local dollars. We don't have, within the 900,000 that we've kind of loosely identified for business support and economic development, I don't yet have a sense of what the budget for that program would be. We would still need to work with those partners in the tourism marketing field to get a better understanding and come back later to the council with a more specific proposal on that particular program.
Thank you. And then just a final comment, not a question, for the Shop Local Christmas 2021. That's super exciting. I would fully support that program. I would just make a suggestion that we start letting local businesses know that that's coming so they can do some additional purchasing so we don't run into some of what we ran into at the end of last year where it seemed like everything was sold out everywhere in our town. So that's good.
Any other council comments? Ms. Hutchings?
I was just going to comment that March 30th, there is a Zoom ABC board meeting when they are supposed to be looking at their extensions of alcohol being served off the premise in yards and on decks. So that might be something you might want to check on. Thank you.
Mr. Chilson?
Just a quick clarification request on expenditures for the outdoor dining. I've seen some places around here that have got really creative with temporary tables, portable heaters, and even tents. Would the funding available through that program be available specifically to temporary accommodations, or could we support capital improvement projects? Like if someone wanted to go reclaim part of their parking lot or clear a portion of land and put up a gazebo or an expanded patio, I don't know if that's going to be something that we'd be able to fund at that level, but if we could even support a portion of that, I'd love to see projects that come out of this that have lasting, like permanent ability to expand dining and tourism capabilities here locally.
Thank you, Mr. Chilson. Through the mayor, I know John Zarneski, his spidey sense just got tingly because he very much is advocated for what you've just described. And we've had these conversations about, how would we potentially evaluate project proposals that felt more permanent in nature. One of the opportunities we have is to continue funding projects like that through our normal storefront improvement program. So the normal storefront improvement program right now, we reviewed the eligibility criteria. A project like that would qualify, and that's a program that allows you to fund, I believe it's up to $7,500. But we recognize that there might be a project or a restaurant owner that comes in that has an idea. It may be that we can use these funds, or it may be that we can use a portion of these funds and our regular, more established, permanent facade improvement program to address the more long-term need.
Okay, so I guess following up on that, would it be possible to expand the limit of what we make available through the storefront improvement programs, specific to outdoor dining just for this year in response to COVID and utilizing these funds? Because, if someone came to us and said, I had this brilliant idea to put a large gazebo down on our downtown strip, I would be fine with providing $15,000 for that instead of $7,500 if it's a significant improvement to our walkability and just visual appeal in downtown areas. That's really in line with the kind of the economic direction we're trying to go with this town. So.
Yeah, through the mayor, thank you again. I think what we will do is, and if it's acceptable to the council, we're going to learn a lot. And I forgot, I didn't answer Mr. Ruffridge's question about what do we think the demand will be. We don't know, but we will learn a lot as soon as we embark on this process. And with this funding, we're going to have to evaluate it first through a lens of, is it eligible according to the federal guidelines for the use of CARES Act money? It may be that some of the more long-term projects we feel like may be harder to justify for the use of the CARES Act funds. That might be an example where we come back and say, we think the city's general fund is a more appropriate use of that money. And we would be absolutely willing to come back to the council and ask for more money for the storefront improvement program, particularly if it was going to generate some new interest from business owners. I like the idea of people being able to try this. We hope that they decide that it's a long-term decision that they want to implement permanently. I like the idea of being able to use these funds to let them experiment. But ultimately, we would love to see it expand on a more permanent basis. And we'll keep an eye open if we move forward with this program on opportunities to facilitate both.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to the manager. I'd like to suggest in terms of on the outdoor dining assistance, that there be some type of a cap, and that I would hope that we'd try to reach more people than fewer, so that as compared to a couple of large projects for one particular business, I would hope that maybe we could reach more. I also very much like what was said in terms of a storefront, other grants being possible. And the last thing I just want to mention, shop local. I think we have just begun to see the potential of that. And so again, certainly getting word out early, finding out who all wants to be part of it. I think that with what Kenai did, I think, again, that just enhances the number of people that will be aware of what there is. And so I hope in your designation of use of funds that the amount there would be greater than this year, because I think there'll be a much greater use. Thank you.
Anything else? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Councilmember Carey,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Ruffridge,
Yes.
Student Representative Cox.
Yes.
You have 4 yes votes and 1 abstention.
The resolution 2021-013 passes 4-0 with 1 abstention. Moving on to next item on the agenda is mayor and council reports. Mayor's report, not much to report. I will be unavailable for the next meeting, and Vice Mayor Parker will be chairing that meeting. If things go much longer, I'm going to have to bail out of here in about 45 minutes. That'll be it for me. I'm done. We'll go on to council reports and boards and commissions. Soldotna Planning and Zoning Commission, Ms. Parker.
Thank you. Okay, so Planning and Zoning met last week, and there was just one item really on the agenda. They looked at a resolution to approve a conditional use permit for an 8-unit apartment building. And they also took a look at things that were accomplished in 2020. The list is a little bit shorter than it has been in years in the past. Obviously, because of COVID, there were fewer projects and requests for permits and variances, things like that. Then there was also a presentation on zoning code, because there are quite a few new members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that was actually a really interesting breakdown by staff of the various zones that we have, different ways that zones could be changed in our community to just better impact residents' lives. It was really interesting. I have to try to remember the way John phrased it. Something about the whole purpose of zoning was just to kind of like make sure you're not really annoying your neighbor. I'm sure that's not how he said it. He probably said it way more eloquently than that, but it's essentially so that, you know, what you're doing is not really bothersome to your neighbors. And that was, I think, a really good way to look at it. They also talked a little bit about the cold weather shelter meetings that John's been attending. They believe that that group has found a location. They weren't saying what that location is, but it was on, they said K Beach near the food bank. But that's really exciting that there could be potentially a cold weather shelter getting up and running in our community. And then some commissioners attended APA as well. I believe it was mostly virtual, but I did not get clarification on that. I'm assuming with the times. But that was really it. It was a good meeting, and there was a lot of good attendance. And Mayor Whitney, Charlene Toutfast ran that meeting from her airport, waiting for her flight. So, you know, we could always get you on Zoom as you're headed out the door to catch your plane.
Yes, I don't want to miss that plane. Okay, thank you for your report. We'll move on to item 10, City Manager's Report. The repeal of previous restrictions and policy for large events at city parks and planning. Update for 2021 community events. Ms. Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have much to add. I've included a memo in the packet. I think we've been communicating with the council about commencing planning for the summer events and broadening them back open. I had originally intended to bring that policy back to the council for action, but when I reread it many months after we first adopted it, we actually, at the time, had given the administration the ability to take that step, to either amend or repeal it. And so I included the memo in the packet to notify you of our intention to do that, that it has been repealed, that we're operating with just individually working with event promoters, including the chamber, the Wednesday market, and will be open to other types of events as well. So our Parks Department will just continue to work with folks as they come in through the regular park reservation process, and wanted to include this in the packet to have an opportunity to respond or answer any questions about that.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the city manager? Thank you. Well, moving right along, we'll move on to item 11 on the agenda, public comments. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Seeing no one here in the council chambers, do we have any raised hands on Zoom?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. There are no hands raised.
Thank you. We'll close the public comments and then move on to council comments. We'll start with Student Representative Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is spring break right now, so not much to report on. Winter sports are coming to a close. I know that skiing had state last weekend. Basketball was in the Valley, which they will be having state soon. I think once we get back around next week. I want to say Friday. And then on Monday, actually, soccer starts, which soccer and track will be starting, which is going to be interesting because we're going to be stuck inside because of the snow. And then, I don't know, as you may know, the vaccine is now open to everybody 16 and older, at least the one of them is. And I've received mine, and many of my friends and other students are either planning or have signed up to get theirs, so that's getting out there.
Thank you for your report. And when track season starts, it'll be with snowshoes. Mr. Ruffridge.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Mr. Cox is saying about vaccines being widely available. Huge point of pride for the state of Alaska, and I commend the governor and public health officials and all those involved in the decision-making process on that to put us at the head of the pack for providing vaccines to as many people that want it. Pfizer vaccine is available to people 16 and over, and 2 others available to people 18 and over. And so we've really reached that point where, I mean, looking at the policy for the park in the summer, it's almost shocking to see that document again and remember that time that we were agonizing over those decisions, and then here we are, almost a year to date after things were shut down in a big way, having a completely different conversation. And I encourage any of those individuals who feel like they want to get a vaccine that they are here available. We have hundreds of appointments still available for the month of March across the peninsula, others throughout the state as well, and they will keep coming. So there's people at the borough, at the city, at private clinics, and all over the place aiding and helping in this process. So if anybody has questions or comments or issues that they feel need addressed, there's lots of places to reach out, and I'm sure anyone at the city will be willing to help, and borough, and certainly other areas as well. So I will not say that we've officially won the battle, but it feels pretty good to be in the position that we're in right now, and there's a lot of good people that have been involved in that effort, and huge thanks to them.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffridge. Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to begin just by saying that the investments and allocation meeting that we had before this meeting was excellent. Greatly appreciate the work done by the firm that we are employing. And again, lots of room for good discussion. So I want to thank staff very much for helping and making that. Second thing, I want to thank everyone for the Soldotna Police Department resolution of support. And I just want to mention in June, so in 3 months, next one I'm hoping to work on is for the small commercial interests in the city, particularly those who do business out of their home. And be very open to anyone that'd like to work with me on that. But again, to facilitate, again, an applause for those, and certainly the chamber will be involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Mr. Chilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to add again that really, really excited to see our Shop Local program returning this holiday season. As we all know, that was fantastic this last year, and I'm looking forward to see the tremendous difference that it's going to make again when it returns this winter. And just lastly, thanks to our streets department. It's definitely been a war against snow this year, and it's hard to see that where we're going with that, but I know it's been a continual effort, and it's something that's deeply appreciated, so thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chilson. Ms. Parker.
The only thing I wanted to touch on was happy belated International Women's Day. It was this past Monday, also my 7-year anniversary with my husband, so told him you're welcome for celebrating that on International Women's Day. But I just wanted to say how proud I am when we look at our council, and we're roughly 50% female. We also have an awesome city manager, finance director who are women, and I just think it's so wonderful that residents in our city can look at our council and our administration and actually see themselves reflected in that. That's not the case across the entire peninsula, particularly at our assembly. Other cities in the area, they don't have that kind of gender diversity that we do on our council, and I really like to see that, and I hope that we continue this pattern of allowing women's voices to be heard in places where they need to be heard, which is everywhere. Thank you. And drive carefully.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Ms. Hutchings.
Well, I just wanted to say that I was very proud of the Assembly this last week when they passed the emergency declaration to go through the end of the fiscal year, and I know that Kenai has done theirs, and I'm assuming we will be doing ours before the end of this month, which will put us in a good position, depending on what happens with COVID, without COVID, with the vaccines. And again, as Mr. Chilson said, the snow has been horrendous. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchings. Next item on the agenda is executive session. We have no need for one tonight. Next one is meeting announcements. March 18th, 2021, the Airport Commission meeting at 5:30 p.m. and March 24th, 2021, City Council meeting at 6 p.m. here in the chambers. Seeing no other business before us, meeting is adjourned.